Hey, book community. So in the last year, I have read 5 Stephen King novels. Now, I plan to read more. That's all I've gotten read so far. So what I wanted to do was rank my 5 Stephen King books from best to least enjoyment. Now, when I say least enjoyment, don't take that too seriously. I enjoyed them all. There's really not a lot of complaints I have about these books. There may be some things within those books that I would prefer maybe not have been there or have been a little different, but for the most part, I just enjoyed them, and so I want to talk about that. But before I go too far into or start my ranking, I want to talk about one particular book, The Stand. Now, you see it has a bookmark in it, and that's because I have read about 65% of it, and the best way I can describe this, I've enjoyed every bit of it so far. I have enjoyed this book. But it's been a while since I've gone back to it. I started last November reading it. I read a good chunk, and then I came back and read some more, and then I came back and read some more, and I haven't opened it again since spring. That has apps, and I know that a lot of the Stephen King fans would say, you've got to read the rest of The Stand, and I will. It has nothing to do with me enjoying the book. It has nothing to do with not enjoying the book. It just has to do with I haven't gotten back to it. I am going to get back to it, and I'm sure it will rank pretty high on my list. But at this point, this is how I rank my 5 Stephen King novels that I've read so far. Number 5 is The Gunslinger. The first book of, you see it right back there on top of my shelf, the first book of the Dark Tower series. A lot of people there's a lot of mixed reactions on The Gunslinger. With me, I enjoyed it. It was a fun read. There were a lot of weird parts in it, obviously. There were some things in it that just kind of blew your mind a little bit, and I had to go back and reread it. But it's very short, and that may have something to do with it coming in at number 5 for me, but I enjoyed it. It was a good introduction to this world that he has created. Of course, I know there's a lot of other books that come in and join in with this, but this is my number 5 read. Number 4 for me. Now, in listening to other people talk about Stephen King books, this book always comes in towards the bottom most of the time, and that is Desperation. Now, let me say this. If we are ranking for book covers, step out just a moment. If we're ranking them for book covers, this would be number 1. And, of course, we know it goes hand in hand with The Regulators. What a great idea for a book cover. Anyway, so I enjoyed it. I guess I can see what people say, maybe why they didn't enjoy it quite as much. It's a thick book. He may have could have taken some out of it. But anyway, I enjoyed it. There's a lot of scary things in it. In fact, there's one particular scene in it that just had my skin crawling. And I say that's a good thing. That's what you want Stephen King stories to be able to do for you. Just, I have no complaints. I don't have a lot of complaints about this particular book. Just the other books were that much better to me when I read them. At number 3, my number 3 book is It. Now, if we were just talking about a coming-of-age story, this would have to go at the top of pretty much any list of books, because the coming-of-age story that you see in The Losers Club is phenomenal. Stephen King writes children well. He writes preteens coming into teenage and growing up older. He writes that so well. Of course, he takes it from when they were children and when they were adults, and it just brings it together well. The scary elements in this book, the clown, the monster, whatever you want to call him, the entity, just every time he's on the page, it just brings chills to you. It's scary as it should be, as it's supposed to be. A lot of gore, a lot of things that just make you want to turn your head, but you can't. All of that is in here. There are a couple of scenes in this book. There's one in particular that everybody talks about towards the end. I agree. It would have been better had it not been in there. I know there are discussions on why it should be in there. I think it probably shouldn't have been in there. There's another couple of scenes that I wish wouldn't have been in here. But other than that, an outstanding and phenomenal book by Stephen King. I grew up watching the miniseries that came on TV, so I was pretty familiar with the story. Now, my number 4 is Salem's Lot. Now, let me talk about this. This was my first Stephen King read. This is the first book I ever read by Stephen King. I believe my dad, who was a Stephen King fan, this was probably his favorite, one of his favorites, as it's one of my favorites. The first one I read, and then up until I read this last book, it would have been number one. But just everything with this book, with the vampires, with the scary city, with the town that they live in, Jerusalem's Lot, with all of that put together, it just made for a very, the story drew you in. It gave you the creeps. He spends so much time talking about citizens of this town of Jerusalem's Lot, and you're just involved in everything. You want to know what's going on behind those doors. You want to know what secrets that family has, and then it all comes together towards the end of the book for just this very, very chilling section. So that is number 4. Now, number 5. Some may want to say, you can't put this as your number 1 because you just read it and that you'd be biased towards it. That may be the case, but just call me biased. Pet Cemetery. This book, I don't even know what I want to say about it. The scary elements are there. The character development is there. But something that stands out in this book is just his deep dive into grief. In this book, you see that I still have my bookmark in there that I didn't move. In this book, he takes the characters and he just dives into how one deals with grief, how you think of death, what death means, maybe death of your animal, maybe not the death of your animal, maybe the death of a loved one. And he takes that and he just opens it wide up and just displays this terrible, wonderful story about how you deal with death and how we would want to deal with death if we had the power to change things. So this book is my favorite Stephen King book so far. Now, again, I've only read 5, but this is my number 1 Stephen King book. So what's next for me? I have a shelf over here to my left that is most all Stephen King books. I bought a lot of Stephen King books that I plan on getting to. Well, what's next for me? In October, I plan on reading several spooky books, scary books, but at the top of my list is The Shining. Now, I watched the movie for the first time last October, and I enjoyed it. I know there's differences between the movie and the book, and that's one reason I'm excited about getting to this and finding out what is such the big deal about it, why people love it so much, particularly one particular chapter, which is The Room. You know what I'm talking about if you've read it. So I look forward to everything about this book, and I know it's going to be just what I need for a spooky season. So that's how I rank my 5 books that I have read by Stephen King at this point. How would you rank these books, or how have you ranked the Stephen King reads that you've read so far? Until next time, go read books.